Ever catch yourself absolutely certain about something, only to realize later you were totally off?
Oh, yeah, like you swear you saw something move out of the corner of your eye.
Exactly. Or you misheard a word and the whole sentence just went sideways. Well, what if the brain itself, the thing interpreting reality, isn't like a perfect camera? What if it's more like a storyteller, constantly spinning a yarn that, well, helps us survive?
It sounds pretty counterintuitive, doesn't it? That our own brain might be, well, deceiving us.
Right. So today we're diving deep into this, how our brains actively construct reality and, how they might be playing tricks on us all the time.
And the fascinating part really is that this isn't some kind of error or bug. It seems to be a feature, honed by evolution. We'll be looking at Francisco J. Rubia's book, El cerebro nos engaña, The Brain Deceives Us, and other insights from neuroscience.
Okay, so this whole brain is illusionist thing. Rubia, he's a doctor, a researcher.
Right, Universidad Complutense de Madrid.
He argues that what we perceive as solid reality is actually a highly efficient construction. Maybe not perfectly accurate, but efficient.
Exactly. It's like a neurological magic trick almost, designed to help us navigate a world that's just overflowing with information. Way too much to process raw.
A magic show in the skull, I like that.
And this view, it fits with what science calls monismo materialista, materialist monism.
Which means?
Basically that the mind isn't separate. It's not some ghost in the machine. It's what the brain does, a function of the physical brain tissue.
So thoughts, feelings, consciousness itself.
Right.
It all comes from neurons firing.
That's the idea. It moves away from that old mind-body split, dualism. It's all brain processes.
Okay, but why? Why the deceptive? If the brain's so powerful, why not just give us the straight dope, the raw data?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It boils down to survival utility versus absolute precision. Meaning, a perfectly accurate, like pixel-perfect view of reality isn't always the most useful thing for staying alive. What you need is a functional representation. Quick reactions, finding food, avoiding danger. That's the priority.
So handling the raw data is just too slow or too much.
Exactly. Think about the sheer volume. Billions of photons hitting your eyes, constant pressure waves on your ears, molecules landing on your tongue. It's staggering.
Wow. Oh.
Our brains just can't process all that in real time. So, evolution's solution. Shortcuts. Simplifications, and yes, illusions. Our senses act like really smart filters, cutting out the noise, highlighting what's probably important.
So it's like an optimized operating system, prioritizing the essentials for survival.
Yeah.
Okay, I get that. Can you give us some examples, like concrete examples of these helpful illusions?
Sure. Let's start with touch. Ignacio Morgado talks about this in La Fábrica de las Ilusiones, the illusion factory. You feel a touch on your hand, right?
Yeah.
But the actual feeling, the experience that's constructed in your brain. The classic and maybe most striking example is phantom limb syndrome.
Oh, right, where people feel sensations in a limb that's not there anymore.
Precisely. They can feel pain, itching, warmth, all in the missing limb. It's powerful proof that the sensation originates in the brain's map of the body, not necessarily in the physical nerve endings of the limb itself. The brain's still running that part of the simulation, you could say.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Truly. Okay, what about something like color? We see colors everywhere.
Color. This one really bends your mind. The redness of an apple or the blueness of the sky. Those qualities don't exist out there in the physical world as such.
Wait, so red isn't red?
Not intrinsically, no. What exists are electromagnetic waves of different wavelengths. Color is the brain's brilliant interpretation of those wavelengths. It assigns these useful labels red, blue, green, which help us enormously.
How so?
Think about it. Identifying ripe fruit, spotting predators, reading emotional cues like someone blushing. Color perception gives us vital information quickly. It's a super practical illusion, a shortcut with huge survival value.
That's incredible. It makes me think of Donald Hoffman's idea, the user interface theory.
Yes. Hoffman's analogy is fantastic. He compares our perception to the icons on a computer desktop.
Okay.
Those icons, the little pictures for files or trash bin, they're useful, right? They let you interact with the complex code and electronics underneath without needing to understand any of it. But the icon isn't the reality of the transistors and the code.
Right, it's a symbol.
Exactly. Hoffman argues our perceptions are like that. They're useful symbols, an interface that helps us interact with reality effectively enough to survive and reproduce. But they probably don't reflect the true underlying nature of that reality. Natural selection, he argues, favors adaptive interfaces, not necessarily truthful ones.
Okay, so this isn't just philosophy anymore. There's actual neuroscience backing this up. What's the evidence?
Oh, absolutely. Modern neuroimaging, fMRI, EEG, things like that provides compelling support. We can see the brain in action, constructing these perceptions. Well, for starters, studies consistently show our senses aren't objective measuring devices. Think about inattentional blindness, the famous invisible gorilla experiment.
Oh yeah, I remember that. People watching a video counting basketball passes.
And they completely miss a person in a gorilla suit walking right through the middle of the scene because their attention is focused elsewhere.
It's amazing what we can just completely ignore.
It really is. It shows how much our brain filters out, even when it's right in front of us. It's like attention is a spotlight, and everything outside that beam just doesn't register consciously.
So attention shapes what even gets into our perceived reality.
Precisely. And fMRI studies show something else fascinating. When you see an object, it's not just your primary visual cortex lighting up.
Okay.
Areas involved in memory, emotion, expectation, the association areas, they light up too. They link what you're seeing to your past experiences. Sometimes these higher areas even show activity before the primary sensory area.
Before. How does that work?
It suggests the brain is already predicting what it's about to see based on context and past experience, which leads us nicely into the predictive brain theory.
The predictive brain. Okay, that sounds important. Tell me more.
It's a really central idea in neuroscience right now. The basic concept is that your brain isn't passively waiting for sensory input. It's constantly active, generating predictions about what sensory input it expects to receive next.
Like guessing what's coming.
Sort of, yeah, based on its internal models of the world. Then it compares these predictions to the actual sensory data streaming in.
And what happens then?
If there's a match, great. If there's a mismatch, a prediction error, the brain updates its model, or often it might subtly reinterpret the incoming data to fit the prediction. It's often more energy efficient for the brain to stick with its predictions if the input is ambiguous.
Huh. So it kind of nudges reality to fit what it expects.
In a way, yes, especially when the signals are noisy or unclear. The Adelson checkerboard illusion is a perfect example.
Ah, the one with the two squares that look totally different colors or shades of gray, but they're actually the same.
Exactly. They are physically identical shades of gray. But your brain sees one in shadow and one in light, predicts how shadows affect surfaces, and essentially corrects your perception. So you see one as dark and one as light, matching the prediction even though the raw input is the same.
Yeah, that one always gets me. It's so hard to believe they're the same shade.
It vividly shows that predictive processing in action. Another line of evidence is sensory cross-plasticity.
Cross-plasticity.
Yeah, think about individuals who are blind and learn Braille. Studies show that areas in their visual cortex, the part normally used for sight, get repurposed. They become active when the person is reading Braille with their fingertips.
Wow. So the brain rewires itself based on the input it gets.
Exactly. It's incredibly flexible. It shows the brain constructing sensory abilities, adapting its hardware for the job at hand. If vision isn't available, that cortical real estate can be used for touch.
So it's really building our experience from the ground up and adapting as needed.
Precisely. And circling back to Hoffman's idea, this all supports the notion that our conscious perception is like that user interface, that facade. It's a simplified, useful construction built upon much more complex underlying processes, and maybe a reality that's very different from how we perceive it. There are even mathematical models trying to figure out what that underlying reality might be like.
And things like neurophenomenology, trying to link the brain activity to the subjective feeling of it all.
Exactly, trying to bridge that gap between the objective firing of neurons and our rich, subjective conscious experience. How do discrete brain events become this seamless flow of awareness? It's a huge puzzle.
So this whole predictive thing, it's not just a weird quirk. It's fundamental for survival.
Absolutely fundamental. Think about the time lag. Sensory processing isn't instantaneous. It takes time for signals to travel from your eyes or ears to your brain and get processed, maybe 80 milliseconds, maybe up to half a second for complex stuff.
It doesn't sound like much, but I guess in a dangerous situation.
It could be the difference between life and death. If you only reacted after fully processing the charging lion, you'd be lunch.
Right.
So the brain needs to anticipate. As neuroscientist Luis Miguel Martinez Otero put it, our brain lives in the past, predicting the future to understand the world in real time.
Wow, that's a great quote. Lives in the past, predicting the future.
It has to function effectively now. This is where the concept of the Bayesian brain comes in.
Bayesian. Like Bayes' theorem from statistics.
Exactly like that. The idea is that the brain operates like a sophisticated probability machine. It holds certain beliefs or models about the world based on prior experience.
Okay.
Then, as new sensory evidence comes in, it uses something like Bayes' theorem to update those beliefs, calculating the most probable state of the world. It's constantly generating predictions based on these probabilities.
So it's making educated guesses all the time.
That's a good way to put it. Educated guesses based on past data. It predicts what's likely, compares it to what's actually happening, and then refines its internal model based on any prediction errors. Or, as we said, sometimes it might just interpret the incoming data to fit the prediction, especially if the prediction is strong and the data is weak or ambiguous.
Okay, so it's constantly running simulations based on everything I know this is probably what's happening, and then checking against reality.
Precisely. And we see evidence for this in brain activity. Using EEG or MEG, researchers can actually detect signals that look like prediction waves flowing from higher brain areas down to sensory areas, and prediction error signals flowing back up when the input doesn't match the prediction.
You can actually see the prediction happening.
You can see the electrical correlates of it, yeah. It's a constant dialogue between expectation and reality within the brain. Even your pupils can dilate slightly before predictable change in light happens, showing the brain anticipating.
That's incredible. The brain's already reacting before the event.
It's trying to stay ahead of the game.
Okay, this brings us back to visual illusions. You said they're not just mistakes, but they actually show us how the brain works, its strategies.
Exactly right. Neuroscientist Amanda Sierra said something really insightful. These illusions should make us reflect on the reliability of our knowledge of the real world. They aren't glitches, they're side effects of a highly efficient system. They reveal the assumptions and shortcuts the brain takes.
Like how it fills in gaps. You mentioned the blind spot earlier.
Perfect example. We all have a blind spot in each eye where the optic nerve leaves the retina. No photoreceptors there.
But we don't see a hole in our vision.
Nope. The brain just papers over it, filling it in with whatever pattern or color surrounds the spot. It auto-completes based on context. The Knissa triangle is another great one.
The one that looks like a white triangle on top of other shapes, but the triangle's edges aren't actually drawn?
That's the one. Your brain creates those illusory contours based on the Pac-Man-like shapes and its expectation of seeing complete objects. It constructs the triangle.
And those weird motion illusions. The ones that seem to spin or crawl. Like Akiyoshi Kitoka's rotating snakes.
Ah, yes, those are fascinating. They seem to exploit tiny, rapid eye movements called saccades.
Saccades.
Yeah, your eyes are constantly jumping around, even when you think you're staring fixedly. The brain usually smooths this out, so you perceive a stable world. But the specific patterns and colors and illusions, like the rotating snakes, interact with these tiny movements, tricking the motion detection parts of your brain into seeing movement where there is none. Your own eye movements create the illusion.
Wow, so my brain's interpreting its own actions as external motion.
Something like that, yes.
Oh.
And then you have multi-stable illusions like the Necker cube or the rabbit duck image.
Where you can see it one way, then it flips, and you see it the other way.
Exactly. The input is ambiguous. It supports two or more interpretations. The brain can't settle, so it flips between them. This really highlights that perception isn't passive reception. It's an active interpretation, the brain making a decision about what it's seeing.
And you mentioned the McGurk effect, too, where sight changes sound.
Yeah, a classic cross-modal illusion.
Yeah.
You see someone saying ga, but the audio is actually ba. Most people hear da, or even ga. Their brain integrates the visual lip movements and the auditory sound, creating a perception that's different from either input alone. It shows how the senses influence each other in constructing our reality.
It really drives home this point about the brain being context-sensitive, doesn't it? It's not processing things in isolation.
Absolutely not. It's all about context or relationships. Remember Martinez Otero's point about the Adelson checkerboard? We don't perceive absolute brightness or color, but relative brightness and color compared to what's around it.
Which explains. Like the dress. Remember that internet thing? Blue and black versus white and gold.
Exactly. A perfect real-world example. The lighting in the photo was ambiguous, so people's brains made different assumptions about the illumination context, leading to totally different perceptions of the same colors.
So my brain assumed one type of lighting, someone else has assumed another.
It shows how these context effects play out. Perceptual constancy, seeing a door as rectangular even when the image on your retina is trapezoidal as it opens, relies on this too. The molar liar illusion with the lines and arrowheads.
Where the lines look different lengths but aren't.
Right. Again, context cues influencing perception. Even in hearing, there's the phonemic restoration effect. If a cough obscures a sound in a word, your brain often fills in the missing sound based on the sentence context. You don't even notice it was missing.
Our brains are constantly editing and filling things in.
And neurologically, we see feedback loops. Higher brain areas send signals down to primary sensory areas, influencing how that basic sensory information is processed. Context matters right from the start.
Okay, this is all making my own brain feel a bit unreliable. Which leads to maybe the most mind-bending part, neuroillusions of consciousness. Is our actual sense of self, the I feeling, also a construction?
That's the big, profound question being explored now, and there's some suggestive, maybe even unsettling evidence. Benjamin Libet's famous experiments from decades ago.
The ones about free will.
Kind of. He found brain activity related to a decision, like flexing your wrist, seemed to start before the person reported consciously deciding to do it. It raises questions about whether our feeling of conscious intention comes after the brain has already initiated the action.
So the feeling of deciding might be an interpretation after the fact.
That's one interpretation, yes. Then there's Michael Gazzaniga's work with split brain patients, people whose connections between the left and right brain hemispheres were severed.
Right.
He found the left hemisphere, which is typically dominant for language, would often confabulate, basically, make up plausible stories to explain actions initiated by the nonverbal right hemisphere, actions the left hemisphere had no conscious access to. He called this the interpreter module.
So part of the brain is just creating narratives to make sense of what the rest of it is doing.
It seems that way, trying to create a coherent sense of self and agency. And then there's the rubber hand illusion.
Oh, that one's creepy.
Mm-hmm.
Where you can trick someone into feeling like a rubber hand is their own?
Exactly. By stroking their hidden real hand and the visible rubber hand simultaneously, the brain often incorporates the fake hand into its body map. People report feeling the touch on the rubber hand. It shows how malleable our sense of body ownership is.
It really makes you question where you begin and end.
Indeed. And researchers like Rubia himself in La Conexión Divina have looked at the neural correlates of intense mystical or religious experiences, suggesting even these profound states might be linked to specific patterns of brain activity rather than external supernatural causes.
But even deeply spiritual feelings could be brain states.
From a neuroscientific perspective, yes, and philosophers like Thomas Metzinger talk about the phenomenal self model, the idea that there isn't a fixed, solid self entity inside us. Instead, what we experience as I is actually a complex, constantly updated neural simulation, a transparent model of the organism that we mistake for the real thing.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. It really challenges our basic trust in our own perceptions, our own feelings.
It absolutely does. Amanda Sierra's point, again, reflecting on the reliability of our knowledge, it brings to mind philosophers like Immanuel Kant, distinguishing between the thing in itself, noumenon, which we can never directly access, and the world as it appears to us, phenomenon, shaped by our mind's structures. Neuroscience seems to be providing empirical weight to that kind of idea.
So does this mean we're just stuck in our own heads, like some kind of neuronal solipsism, unable to know anything for sure?
Well, maybe the goal isn't perfect objective knowledge. Perhaps, as Rubia and others suggest, human knowledge is fundamentally pragmatic. It's about creating models that are good enough to help us navigate, survive, predict, and thrive. Adaptive, rather than perfectly veridical.
Which has real-world implications, right?
Yeah, definitely. Think about eyewitness testimony in court. We now know it's far less reliable than we used to think. Understanding mental health conditions might involve seeing them as alterations in these constructive brain processes, and even just communicating with each other. Maybe some misunderstandings happen because we're literally experiencing slightly different constructed realities based on our individual brains and experiences.
It makes you think differently about disagreements. Okay, so clearly our understanding is still evolving rapidly. What are some of the exciting frontiers? Where is neuroscience going with all this?
Oh, it's moving incredibly fast. Neuroimaging keeps getting better, giving us finer detail. Fields like neuroaesthetics are looking at how we perceive beauty and art, artificial intelligence, especially deep learning networks that can be fooled by adversarial images, is actually teaching us about potential vulnerabilities or strategies in our own visual systems.
So AI helps us understand ourselves.
In some ways, yes. Then there's Evo-Devo, evolutionary developmental biology, comparing brains across species, looking at how these systems evolved. Epigenetics, how environment shapes brain development. Neuroplasticity research continues to show how adaptable the brain is.
Brain-machine interfaces too, right?
Huge area. blurring the lines between mind and machine, raising massive questions about perception and identity, and as we mentioned, neurophenomenology, trying to connect the objective science with subjective experience. It's a really vibrant landscape.
It really is. So wrapping up this pretty mind-bending deep dive, what's a core message people should take away?
I think the central idea from Rubia, and supported by so much current neuroscience, is that this notion of the brain deceiving us isn't about being flawed. It's a fundamental, evolutionarily brilliant strategy for survival. What we perceive isn't raw reality, but a constructed, filtered, predictive, and incredibly useful illusion.
Right. Like Ignacio Morgado said, these illusions are practical, they're functional, they help us get things done and, well, stay alive.
Exactly. And maybe the most amazing paradox in all of this is that this deceptive brain, the one constructing these useful illusions, is the very same organ that has allowed us, humans, to figure all this out, to understand the cosmos, physics, biology, and even itself to a degree no other species has come close to. We use our constructed reality to uncover truths about actual reality.
That's a fantastic point to end on, a truly profound thought. So, for you listening, maybe the question to ponder is, how does knowing your brain actively build your world change how you view your own experiences, your own certainty about things?
Maybe it sparks some curiosity to look into the work of people like Rubia or Antonio Damasio or Ignacio Morgado, Donald Hoffman. There's a lot of fascinating thinking out there.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for exploring that with us today.
My pleasure. It's endlessly fascinating stuff.